if you're just joining, we're just going to wait another minute or two for people to join the meeting, and we'll get going. Alrighty. Still some people trickling in, so maybe I'll just give it another minute and then I'll get going. Alrighty. Welcome, everybody. I still see the participant list is climbing a little bit, but let's get going. So my name is Nat Militic. I work with Jesse at Alberta Health Services. Welcome to the Western Canada RPA user group. I'll be your host today. Jesse's on, but he's feeling a little bit sick, and if you can believe or you can hear me as well. I have a bit of a cold myself, so I don't sound 100%, but I'm feeling good, so it's all good. So welcome and good morning, or I guess good afternoon, or wherever you're joining us from. So today we have a presentation. I'm going to hand it off to the presenters here in a minute. Just wanted to remind everybody that we are recording the session, and we will be, I think Jesse will be posting this as well. So yeah, just a reminder as well, if you're not speaking, to mute yourself before we get going. I did mute everybody when I started, but yeah, just a reminder again, if you're not speaking, to mute yourself, and hopefully the presenters can still unmute themselves as well. So we have about 65 people on and still climbing a little bit in terms of participation, but we'll get started. And again, the recording will be available anyways for later viewing as well. So today we have 3 presenters from Accerta. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves in a minute here as well. We have Peter Owsiany, Jamie Fisher, and Eli Borwick today, and I'll be handing it off to them. Peter, feel free for you guys to introduce yourself. I'm just taking over from Jesse today, so I don't have all of the bios available. So if you don't mind introducing yourselves and presenting, that would be great.
Sure, thanks, Nat. This is Peter Owsiany. I'm the CEO president of Accerta. And what Accerta does is we actually collaborate with Canadian governments at all levels, municipal, regional, provincial, and federal. And what we do is we operationalize and transform social benefit programs that the governments manage. And how we help them is we provide them the streamlined administrative solutions.
Thanks, Peter. Jamie and Eli, would you like to introduce yourselves as well?
Yeah, thanks, Nat. So Jamie Fisher is my name. I'm a partner with Review Group, and I'll touch on who Review Group are here in a little while. But I manage our Canadian operations, and very excited to be joined here by Peter and Eli and share this solution with you.
Thank you, Jamie. Eli, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, sorry.
Oh.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Eli Borwick. I'm a senior manager with Reveal Group, and I was the solution architect for this solution that we're going to present today. I look forward to talking about it.
Awesome. That's great. Peter, would you like to share the slide deck, or would you like me to?
I can share that one now.
Yeah,
Okay,
James.
perfect.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, can everybody see that?
Sure can, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay, so I'd just like to begin by really thanking Nat and thanking Jesse for this opportunity. This RPA users group is a fantastic initiative, and I know there's a lot of effort and time that goes into this extracurricular activity. There's been some fantastic webinars over the last little while, and hopefully today is insightful for the audience, as those have been. I'd also like to start off by thanking Peter. Peter is a busy man, and particularly this time of year. So we certainly appreciate you giving us some time here, Peter, and giving some insights into this solution. So I introduced myself earlier, but let me quickly talk about who Reveal Group are. We are a boutique intelligent automation services firm. We have deep experience in many of the intelligent automation solutions and platforms. We work in partnership with our clients to build best-in-breed automated solutions, like we're going to present to you today. I mentioned partnership. We're very big on building internal capability. So we're not only about building those best-of-breed automations, but we're also about upskilling our clients and making sure that we not only leave them with the capability to manage the automations that have been built, but also to instill that automation continuous improvement mindset and have the ability to continue to enhance solutions and continue to build automations like we have with Accerta, and Peter will touch on that a little bit later on. I'm going to quickly talk about what we're going to go into today, and then I'll begin with the background and context. So I will provide a little bit of a background into how we got to building the solution at Accerta. I'll touch on that pretty quickly. We're then going to move into looking at the solution itself. So after I've outlaid the objectives of the automation, I'll hand over to Eli, who was instrumental in designing the solution. We'll talk about how the integrations worked and how it all came together. Eli will then touch on some of the numbers. So we'll look at the key metrics that came out of the automation and it continued to come out of the automation. And then finally, we'll talk to Peter, and it'll be a little bit more of a Q&A type session. And I'll talk to Peter more about the business impact and the impact on the people side at Accerta. So to kick things off, Peter and I met almost 18 months ago at the start of this journey. We spent a lot of time with Peter's operational team to really understand the requirements to digitize and to automate the forms processing function at Accerta. So as Peter said, facilitating those government programs in Canada, a lot of that involves extraction of data and processing manual forms. So the overall objective was really to try to automate that process and try to gain the operational efficiencies and the other benefits that do come along with that. After quite a few discussions, we narrowed it down to 4 key objectives. Now, these aren't the only 4 objectives, but these are certainly the ones that we had to have a tick in each of these boxes to build the right solution. So number 1 is pretty obvious. We wanted to extract handwritten text from forms. So Accerta receives about 100,000 pages every month, and the vast majority of those are handwritten. So the first objective was to pull that handwritten data out of the forms and get it into a usable format. Objective number 2, probably just as obvious as the first one, is to actually get that data into Accerta systems. Now, there are 3 main systems, and Eli will talk a little bit more about those, but we want to make sure the data is in the right format so we can put it into the Accerta systems, and then eventually that will get into those governmental databases and systems as that processing is completed on those forms. It's quite simple when you look at the first 2 objectives there, and for any of you on the call that have been through an intelligent OCR or intelligent document processing project or implementation, the complexity comes in the 3rd one. And this is really about human in the loop capability. So there are a number of points in the process, the automated process, where human input is required. That's across a couple of different technologies, which Eli will touch on. But we need to make sure that the humans are coming into the right points of the process in order to gain those efficiencies and make sure we're pushing that ROI. And then number 4 is about a searchable case repository. So we're not only aiming to automate the process, but we are digitizing the process. And when you digitize a process like this, there is a lot of data, and we want to put that somewhere. We want to be able to work out where each case is at each point in time, every case being a form that is being processed. But we also want to be able to do that retroactively. So 3 months down the track, if we want to look for a certain record, maybe we want to pull the data, maybe we want to have a look at the form. So we really wanted to achieve that as a part of the overall solution as well. And very happy to say that these 4 objectives were all met. Some faster than others, but right now these 4 objectives are ticking along quite nicely.
Hey, Jamie, sorry to interrupt you. This is Nat here. Just wondering, I'm hoping everybody can hear Jamie. I sure can. Somebody mentioned that they can't hear the presentation. Is everybody, can you give me a thumbs up or anything if you can hear us? Okay. Okay, Shane's good. Yeah, I think we're okay. I think maybe, yeah.
Okay. I do have some headphones here I can flip to if someone continues to have issues.
Yeah, I can hear you perfect. So all good. Yeah, keep going. Sorry, interrupt.
No worries. Okay. So as we got into the project, the first stage was really about choosing the technologies to fulfill these objectives. And the first one there, after doing quite a few POCs on different technologies on extraction, we ended up with hyperscience as our solution, and Eli will talk a little bit more about that in the next section. But we got fantastic results using hyperscience. I mentioned before that the majority of the data we were pulling was handwriting, and that is certainly the sweet spot for hyperscience. The second objective is probably no surprises, considering this is an RPA users group. The RPA was what we used there, and Blue Prism was the tool that has been implemented here in this solution. And then objective number 3 and objective number 4 were actually bundled together, and we had one technology to solve both of those. It's a technology that a lot of people on this call probably have access to and have used, and that is SharePoint. So we can do the human in the loop at the right points. There's a little bit of it in hyperscience, but then the majority of the exception handling is in SharePoint. And then, of course, the ECM capability of SharePoint is utilized as well to get that data and to link back to the original forms. Once we had the technology decided, we then moved into the process definition stage. For those of you who've been through the RPA delivery lifecycle, you know the importance of the process definition stage. I think in intelligent document processing and intelligent OCR implementations, there's probably an order of magnitude more importance on that process definition. There were up to 40 people who were processing forms at any given time. So there's potentially 40 different ways that the forms are processed. So getting that one way was imperative and critical to the success of the automation. So there was a bit of time spent there before we then moved into the design. Eli was instrumental in that, and along with the Accerta platform and the Accerta business teams. Some critical requirements there were really around the systems. So there were 7 systems in all that were connected. The ways they were connected was a design consideration that was very important. I mentioned getting humans into the right point in the process was critically important, as well as some SLA requirements. So one of the processes that we automated had a 15-minute SLA from the time the form's received, and that changes quite a few things in the design. And then, of course, we're talking about health data here. So there's an overlay of very, very important, sort of governance and security requirements over that. So that had to be taken into account for the design. From there, we went out and built and tested and deployed the solution. I mentioned that in only a few seconds. I guarantee it took a little longer than that, but we got the solution out. We then went into a bit of a change management type phase. There were a lot of people who did the manual process, for quite a while, and now their job changed as the automation was rolled out. It was a huge transformation for that team, for different people in that team. starting to use different systems to process their day-to-day. So there was a bit of work there and to redefine roles and a bit of organizational structural work, and talk a little bit more to Peter about that. And then the last phase really that I wanted to touch on before I hand over to Eli is around enhancements. And I think we're still in that phase. There's some business requirements on one of the processes, particularly Eli will talk to that, where we're talking about relaxing some of the rules to try to up that straight through processing now that we've got a lot of confidence in the automation. We've also flipped some of the UI interactions to APIs with great success. We're doing some work around address matching, and we're also upgrading hyperscience and moving into to more of the semi-structured type models in one of the forms, which has been a bit of fun, which we're going on to. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Eli, who certainly knows a little bit more about the solution. He'll pause for questions at any point in time. So I would encourage questions, see if we can stump Eli. I always like it if we can get him stumped and find a question that he can't answer. So please jump in when he asks for questions. If we're struggling for time, we've got a bit of time at the end for questions. And if we still don't have time, there are other means, and we'll certainly get to those. So I'll hand over to you, Eli.
Thanks so much, Jamie. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a simplified diagram of the architecture that was implemented at Accerta. One thing to note here is that the main orchestration agent that's moving information across all of these boxes is Blue Prism. Blue Prism was a natural choice, an RPA platform that's easy to use. It's low code, so it's accessible to a lot of people in the organization that is not just me. And it has all the features and capabilities for that we need, like credential management, logging, accessibility, code management, and then just being easy to code in and deploy. So every time you see a line in here between boxes, it's Blue Prism moving that information. So I'm going to start with box 1, and this is relating to our input stream, so how information is received at Accerta. So forms come in through either fax, email, or through scanners. So they have a scanning team, and all of this is routed directly into a file share. And in that file share, we have Blue Prism continuously scanning for new input, collecting that information, collecting those files, and then submitting them into HyperScience. Okay, so that's box 1, 2, and 3. Once we're in HyperScience, in box 3, you'll see that there's an element here of a human component with transcription and QA tasks. I'm going to touch on that in a little bit, but I'm going to go over the overall diagram first before we talk about where humans are interacting with the automation. So in box 3, we're classifying the forms. So what that means is we're identifying what the form is, if it matches to one of the layouts that we have defined. And then once we've defined what the form is, what type of application it is, we extract all the fields. Once that process is done, Blue Prism will retrieve that information and run it through a business rule validation engine, and also understand and collect all the metadata around the case that's needed for processing downstream. So these are things like identifying what business rules were infringed upon. Let's say that for a claim, you need your applicant to be over the age of 18. They're not, so that would be flagged and registered. It would be that information is appended to the case in this step. Blue Prism's running that analysis, but now we have it available. Now we have an understanding of what we're looking at, what's in the case, and what files are necessary for that case, and what business exceptions we identified a priori. So once we've done all of that, we're ready to, if that application is good enough, we're ready to submit it into one of the 3 CRM applications that Accerta has. These are homegrown applications. With 2 of them, we interact via API, and with one, it's a web application that we interact via UI. And Jamie touched a little bit on how we're migrating to APIs, and I'll come back to that later on. So once we've submitted into the CRM, there might be an additional business exception or more information that we retrieve from there. Maybe it's the case ID for completing the case. Maybe there was some sort of other validation that we got back from the application, from the CRM, that we'd like to append to the case. So we collate all that information, everything that happened, and then we put it into our workflow application and ECM application, which is SharePoint at the bottom of the screen in box number 6. And you'll see that there's 2 more people here interacting at this step for exception processing and content management. But what's happening here is that we have a queue in SharePoint for each of the specific work streams where people are continuously scanning it and saying, okay, well, here's a new case that I need to complete. The bot has taken it as far as it could. So now I'm going to complete it. And I have accessible to me the form, the additional information related to that form, everything I need to complete it if I were to do it manually. But I also have partial case completion in the CRM. So once they log in into the CRM and say, okay, let me look at this case that the bot tried to do, most of the information is already filled out. And on top of that, they also have the business exception information that was collected during steps 4 and 5. So they know exactly what happened to that form, what was wrong with it, and what they need to remediate. So in the example that I gave earlier, where we were talking about a user being, or the applicant being under the age of 18, which is a silly, small example. But in that case, maybe they need to go call the service provider, and that information is already there. So they know already what they have to do. They remediate the case. At this point in time, they've completed it within the CRM, and Blue Prism will mark the case as completed, saying that that's been, finalized. So that's the overall diagram. I'm going to go and talk a little bit about the human touch points. And the first one I'm going to talk about is around transcription and QA tasks in box 3. So transcription and QA are often confused. It's a little complicated, the difference between them, but it's a crucial difference, and I want to talk a little bit about it. So a transcription task, which is the first box there, is talking about where the machine learning model, when it tried to read a field, it wasn't confident enough that it would read that field accurately, okay? So there's a trade-off between accuracy and automation rate, which I'm going to talk in the next slide. But if the bot is not sure, or if the model is not sure that it's going to achieve 95% accuracy, which is the benchmark chosen by Accerta, then it's going to raise its hand and say, okay, I want to raise this task for a person to come in and give me the right information, because I know I'm not going to be right on this task. So and we need good data quality. So it'll raise that task, and that's a manual transcription task. That's different from a QA task, in that a QA task is a quality assurance task. And what that means is that these tasks are meant to calibrate the system. So where a transcription is just, I need this data so we can complete our task downstream, a QA task is actually the model or the machine is randomly picking fields. There have to be randomly picked for a QA task. It can't be sequential or anything like that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be true QA. And we're presenting this field to a human and asking if the machine read the information correctly. Obviously, we're not going to give the answer to the person, but we say, okay, look at this field. Can you tell me what's written in here? And we're actually going to ask 2 or 3 people. The machine's going to ask 2 or 3 people on the same field what each of them thought was written on there. If there's consensus among all of the people that input the value, then the machine can say, okay, I read this wrong, I read this right, and then it can calibrate itself so that in the future it can raise the right tasks for transcription instead of raising things that are already it read correctly or not. And so what that's doing is lowering our false positivity rate. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a second. Any questions on this piece? Okay, so QA tasks calibrate the model. Transcription tasks ensure that we have good information for our particular case. And another thing to point out on this aspect is that the people that are performing these tasks are referred to as data keyers. So they don't necessarily have to have a deep understanding of the business or the process. They're really there to ensure data quality and accurate reading. So you can assign different people for this part of the process than you would into the next section that I'm going to talk about next. So the next place where we have humans interacting with the solution is in section 6, which we talked about in SharePoint. So this is where we have people that are familiar with the process, that have a deep understanding of what Accerta does. And they're looking at these cases and finishing them off, depending on what the business exception that was raised is. And they're also remediating, they're also taking in calls, let's say, to look at cases that were completed months ago inside SharePoint. They're completed, but maybe there's a question about them. So they have that content management piece, and that's where they're doing that interaction. So that's where they're seeing all the completed cases, remediating cases, and completing things. So those are the 2 human in the loop aspects of the solution. So that's enough about the overall process. Are there any questions here on any of this before we move into metrics? Okay, Jamie, if you could move on to the next slide. All right, so here are some of the key metrics that we've collated for this presentation. The first one on the top left of your screen, we're talking about the volume and the amount of data that we're reading at Accerta each month. So we're looking at 100,000 pages. That's the number Jamie mentioned earlier. And for those 100,000 pages, we're extracting around 610,000 fields per month. So that's a lot of information. And what we're trying to highlight here is that this is a lot of data. And performance is a key aspect of the solution. So we needed to, because there's a high volume, because this automation runs all day, every day, and doing work all the time, there's no real downtime. And because there are tight SLAs within this program, it's important to consider performance and how well everything is running, and also, like things like database management, file repository management, even the CRM data, you have to be on top of that to make sure that everything is still performing as expected and you're not overloading anything. The next metric I like to talk about is the automation rate. So that's the next box to the right here. And I touched up briefly on this before, but the automation rate is the amount of times that the machine needs to raise a manual transcription task versus all of the fields that it's reading. So let's say there are 10 fields on a form. If it read 9 of them and raised 1 for a manual transcription, that would be a 90% automation rate. So across everything that we're reading at Accerta, all fields, we have an automation rate of 92%. Okay, I'm going to explain a little bit about how this works. So an automation rate is tied to the accuracy rate that we've chosen for the program. So the fixed goalpost is we say, okay, model, we want you to read things at 95% accuracy because we need high fidelity. The data quality of our information is important. Otherwise, we might, execute the wrong volume or wrong amounts for a claim, something like that, where there's financial implications. So we need a high accuracy. So we tell that to the machine, and what the machine is going to do is it's going to calibrate itself to lower the automation rate so that it's achieving that accuracy confidently, and then raising the tasks that it wasn't confident about to a person. So let's say we have 95% automation rate, we're at 95% accuracy, we're at 92% automation rate. If we lower that accuracy threshold, let's say our requirement is only that we're 80% accurate. Maybe we just need to get, good enough information. Our automation rate would be much higher because now we have less of a requirement on the machine to do everything perfectly, and it's allowed to take guesses where it thinks it might need to. Okay, so just kind of explaining that concept. The higher the accuracy requirement, the lower your automation rate. Here we're at 92%, and 95% accuracy, usually you're between 90-95% automation rate. Here we're at 92%. The next metric I want to talk about is the reduction in hand-in time for. I'll stop here. Are there any questions? Because I do see one in the chat.
There are a couple. Are we going to share the slide deck as well after the meeting? I don't know, Jesse, if you usually do that or not. We can coordinate that anyways after. Jamie, would you have any?
We absolutely can.
Oh, okay, perfect. Excellent. We'll do that. Yeah. And then there's another one from Nan here as well. Eli, do you want to tackle that now, or did you want to wait until the end? It's up to you.
Let me wrap up here and then let's take questions at the end.
Okay, sounds good.
I'll be quick. So the next metric that I want to talk about is the reduction in handling time for straight-through processing. So this is for straight-through processing specifically. And what a straight-through processing case is a case where a person doesn't have to touch it from beginning to end. So it came in, everything was read, and there were no business exceptions that prevented the case from being completed. It entered the information in the CRM, and a human did not have to touch it. So in that scenario, we've reduced the processing time by 90%, which is a significant number. Typically, the manual case handling time for a form at Accerta is around 10 minutes, and we've reduced that to 1 minute in an STP case, which is significant. This is not the same as talking about cases where we have users remediating business exception cases. So if there's something wrong that happened and we were only to partially complete the case, the reduction in handling time is not as great, but their work experience is enhanced because all of the case information is collated for them. They have the business exception available to them, the form, and also the case is already created in the CRM. So all they're doing is going in there and finalizing what needs to be finished. One other thing I want to highlight is that all of the forms for the 3 work stream we're talking about are going through this automation. We're not selectively choosing anything. If it falls outside of scope, we have ways to handle that and appropriate queues in SharePoint for people to take on things that we didn't capture for whatever reason. So there's no selectivity here. It's handling all the forms. Next, I want to talk about the box on the bottom left corner. This is straight through processing rate. So I mentioned what straight through processing is. It's where we don't have to have people intervene. For claims, we're sitting at a 5% straight through processing rate. And you might think to yourself, okay, well, wow, that's not that high. Is it because of the extraction rate? Is it because the model's not performing as well? And it isn't. The reason why claims are so low is because the business rules requirements for a claim are much higher than for other work streams. So there's financial implication for a claim, right? If you process a claim, you are going to pay someone amount of money. So there's a lot of things that you need to check on a claim to make sure that everything's in order before you submit that payment. So those rules are in place in our automation, and they will vet the case. So if there's anything that's picked up, it needs to be reviewed by a person. That's why it's going to lower the straight through processing rate to the number that it is. But that doesn't tell the full story. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can quantify that partial completion in a second. The other work stream here that we have is enrollment. So here it's kind of an all or nothing process where we don't have the ability to partially complete cases. Well, actually we do. I mixed it up with another process. So we do have that ability here. But the business requirements are lower. So we're at a 30% automation rate, which is a third of the workload, which is significant. But these numbers don't tell the full picture. So let me talk a little bit about how we got to the reduction effort, which is the box below that. So I mentioned previously that when we get a case and we identify the business exceptions, we're still inputting, if possible, we're still going to the CRM and filling out as much as the information we can, and then highlighting that business exception to the user after the fact. So we actually sat down with the Accerta team to say, okay, for this given business exception, how much of the case is completed? So how many fields were filled in the CRM, and how much do you still have to do to take this case to the end? So we actually have a mapping per business exception to say, this is how much work I've done based on this exception, and then we can quantify the percentage of cases that were completed in those referral cases. So if we include that with straight through processing, we've reduced effort in claims by around 63% and a little bit higher in enrollments for around 71%. Finally, I'm going to move into last point here, which is the amount of systems that we've integrated with. So we've integrated with 3 in-house CRM applications that Accerta has built. 2 of them, we initially started with the UI and moved to an API. And the reason for that is twofold. The first is to reduce the amount of system exceptions. So actually, we reduced it to 0. Before, usually with UI interactions, you're sitting at around at least a 5% exception rate, something between 0 and 5, depending on the system. So we've lowered that to absolutely 0, which is fantastic for the ones that we did move to API. And then the other aspect of it is also reduction in the processing time, right? This in an API, the transaction is almost instant. And because SLAs are a key priority for Accerta, that was crucial for some of their work streams. And then finally, we have a third system that's a web browser interface, which we've integrated with as well. Next is the data visualization tool that we integrated with. So I talked about how we're extracting so much information, and we have a breakdown of what the exception types that they're seeing, the volume, seasonality, how people are performing within SharePoint, their efficiency, and how many outstanding work items per work stream exists at the end of the day. All these things are very important and enrich the experience for Accerta quite a bit. So you need to have a data visualization tool where we present our information. We have 2 different methods of producing reports, but one of them is Robo Manager, which is an in-house tool that we upload our data to and visualize there. Finally, we have our IDP tool. That's HyperScience. We've already talked about that. For workflow and CRM, we are using SharePoint, also integrated. And then finally, we have 2 input streams that we've pointed to the solution, which is the faxing and the scanning platforms. They feed data straight into the automation without any intervention from a person. Okay, so that's all I wanted to talk about. And I'm happy to answer any questions we have at this point. And I'm looking to.
Thanks, Eli. Well, there are a couple in the chat. Did you want to tackle those?
Yeah, sure. So let's talk about, is the automation rate the same with the machine learning model confidence level? So So yeah, let me talk about that a little bit more. So the confidence level is actually just an arbitrary number that the machine learning model uses to calibrate itself. So let's say that it reads a field at a confidence of 0.5, something like that. Okay. It'll collate all this information. It'll say, these are all my confidence levels for every time I've read all of these fields. And we tell the machine that we want it to be 95% accurate. It has a calibration out of the box. Okay, so it comes and we say, and in it, it says, for me to be 95% accurate, I need my confidence level that I'm generating to be above the value of, I don't know, 0.5, 0.6. Okay, that's an arbitrary number. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a calibration ruler for the model. So okay, so for me to be 95% accurate, I need to be above 0.6 confident. So that's what I'm going to use, and it'll raise manual transcription tasks in accordance with that rule. What that automation rate is going to land on depends a lot on how it's calibrated. So usually the out of the box automation rate is around 93%. Okay, so it's high. Now, what'll happen is different companies have different forms. People write differently in Canada than they do in Russia or France or the United States. So what happens is you need to calibrate the model to say, okay, model, you're not raising the right task for manual transcription. Let me tell you when you were right and when you were wrong, and then you can pick a confidence value that we were talking about before that more accurately matches, fits this whole system. So does that make sense? It's kind of complicated, and I don't always succeed in explaining it, but hopefully it came through okay. Okay, no problem. The next question, with the scale of 100,000 pages per month and multiple processes involved as shown in the previous page, how many bots do you need to run to process it? That's a good question. So we currently have 8 licenses in production. And we have a breakdown of different bots doing different things. So one bot for processing the cases, once everything has been retrieved from Hyperscience, gathered from the input stream, we're sitting at around 6 licenses. We have one more for overflow. And then the other 2 or 3 licenses, one is for loading. So that's one that's scanning that file share and moving things into Hyperscience and creating the cases. And then we have 2 other processes that monitor the Hyperscience queue because when we raise a transcription task, there's a period of time that we need to give people to complete those tasks. It's not instant because we have a human in loop component. So we're continuously scanning to verify when those people completed those tasks and then move that into the processing queue. So 8 licenses in total, and then we have them kind of spread around different functions. Okay, next question. For handwritten document, how was your experience? What would you say the success rate that Extractor Clay was with handwritten document? Okay, so handwriting is not really the biggest challenge that we have. Hyperscience does pretty well with handwriting, and our automation rate is that value up there, 92%. The biggest challenge we have is actually around tables. And Jamie talked about one of the enhancements that we want to do is to move to a semi-structured model so that we can dynamically handle tables. One of the forms that we handle, there's people fill out that data. It's free. It's a free form table. They fill it out differently, and that presents a challenge to us. And moving to a semi-structured model and training a model just to read those tables is something that we plan on doing in the near future to enhance that. Did you encounter issues with checkbox, especially when people use different crosses versus circle of ticks? Actually, no, that's okay. Checkboxes are mostly okay. We just need something to be there where it was white space before. Some sort of ink would fulfill that. Okay, so Hyperscience performs okay with circles and ticks on checkboxes. Okay, I don't want to hold up too much because we still have a second part of this presentation, so I'm going to hand it back to Jamie. Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks, Eli. And if anyone's got any more, I can see the chat number coming up here. We can jump back into those. So what I'm going to do now is ask, have a bit of a Q&A with Peter on the business impact of the solution. So Peter, the first thing I'm going to ask is, can you please share with the group, what were the drivers for you to really move to an automated solution in your forms processing function?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jamie. I think our goal was to eliminate the routine, mundane tasks and really enable our team members to focus on more important value-added tasks. In addition, I would say we wanted to get off the hamster wheel of having to expand our headcount resources each time we signed a significant contract. So those 2 really drove the reason why we were looking for an automated solution for our form processing.
Yeah, fantastic. And you mentioned the mundane and repetitive, and the metrics that Eli shared certainly talk to success in eliminating some of those mundane tasks. There is still obviously the human in the loop aspects that are covered. But what other benefits did you see from the automation that perhaps you weren't necessarily expecting?
I'd say that I'd say they'd be streamlining the processes with minimal human interaction was one. I mean, we were expecting, of course, seeing some streamlining of processes, but after it was implemented, and I'd say, 2 or 3 months after the implementation, we were really quite pleased at the level of the streamlining of the processes. And secondly, I'd say the ability to generate, capture, analyze much larger data sets, making it possible to predict drivers of business performance, generate important new insights for both ourselves and our customers that we serve.
Yeah, it is a key output of intelligent document processing type use cases. I think Eli actually is still on the screen, 610,000 fields per month. So you can certainly start to get insight on where you may be facing issues with forms, and certainly start to quantify some of your business exceptions. So that's a fairly common one. The question that comes out is, what do we do with all this data? Where do we keep it, and what do we do with it? So it's fantastic to see some more analysis being done through that visualization that Eli mentioned before. Eli touched a little bit on some of the challenges that we'd faced. Peter, tell us about some of the challenges that you faced from maybe the Accerta side and the people side as we implemented the automated solution.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, with a project of this magnitude, there's always the unknown and the unexpected challenges. In our case, I'd say we probably had 2 major challenges. One was user resistance in using the system was the main challenge for us, and that was not that was not a result of the system, the system that was being implemented, but the change. People are very adverse to change in general, and the day-to-day tasks were being affected to certain team members. Because of the implementation, we naturally eliminated many mundane tasks that I mentioned earlier. However, we introduced new processes which caused some challenges. One example was in our old world, paper claims would arrive in the office by snail mail, and those would be scanned, batched, and handed over to the data entry clerks, who would manually input the data on the forms. When we implemented this project, our new processes had us scanning the paper as we were in the past, and then electronically sending it to the appropriate folder for transcription, which would include handwritten forms. The process identified various exceptions where human intervention was required to validate the bot's interpretation of the data and handwritten notes on the forms. So that process surprisingly took some time for our team members to have trust in and to capture what the bot was trying to do. The other challenge, I would say, was training. In hindsight, we should have ensured more frequent user training sessions and not assume that our team members understood the new processes after 1 or 2 training sessions. So essentially what we did was we were shadowing our team members on the new processes to ensure they understood what was required of them, and to also alleviate any concerns they had or lack of trust they had with the new processes.
Yeah, and I think the COVID situation certainly didn't help some of that. You know, from past experience, it's much better to get everyone in a room for a training session than it is virtually. So certainly exacerbated by the work from home movement as a part of that. We also introduced new skill sets into the organisation, Peter, and I think it'd be great if you shared maybe some information about maybe the personal growth or the upskilling of some of the members of your Accerta team throughout the implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. As a result of our project, we've established new and exciting career paths for some of our staff. We've promoted some of our staff, given them new responsibilities that are cutting edge, if you will. In addition, the project has team members, now thinking on how the bots can better streamline other processes that we do, that we could do much better. So it's really done two things. One is it's given the opportunity for the Accerta team members to advance. And secondly, it's gotten our team members to think and look around and say, hey, how can we use this technology that we implemented for this process in other areas of our business, such as finance, closing the books, etc.
Fantastic. And one more question from me, Peter, before I sort of open it up to the floor. We have seen a lot of interest in this IDP, or intelligent OCR space, in the last little while. What advice would you give to other organisations who are looking to start this journey and starting to automate a forms processing function?
Great question. I'd say, first and foremost, get buy-in and engagement, not only from the senior management team, but from all levels of the organization. Create a focus team that represents the user base, who can be involved and provide input into the design and decision-making. As I mentioned earlier on, one of the challenges was change. And if you could have a representative or some sort of representation from various stakeholder groups, they can better manage the change that's coming and get feedback input from all stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've all been through, well, most people I assume on this call have been through the change through RPA, and there certainly is a transformation with RPA. But I think when you put in the IDP, OCR stage, it really does become a transformation, and some people are going to be doing something completely different than what they were in the manual process. So there's certainly a theme of change management from the people side in all of this that must be considered. So enough from me, Peter. I might open the floor up for some questions to Peter, or maybe back to Eli, depending on what comes through.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the great presentation. We'll open the floor up. I think a lot of the questions were already answered by Eli in the chat here, so I'm not sure if there are any outstanding ones. If you can raise your hand, I think you should be able to unmute yourself as well if you'd like to speak up.
So there's a few.
Yeah, it looks like there's one in, Chris is asking, what was the key factor that helped you select Hyper Science over other products?
Yeah, that was a great question. We actually had a selection committee that reviewed the various technologies, and I wasn't on it. It was my leadership team that was involved, and a few managers below them. But what I can tell you is that they looked at all the technologies that were available. They looked at the path of the technologies in terms of what are the future enhancements coming. And with the culmination of the both, they were able to land on Hyper Science and had a very strong confidence level with the technology that Hyperscience was providing and was going to provide in the next, short-term future, 6 to 12 months out.
Thank you. We have a question from Allison. Allison, we can go ahead, please.
Yeah, it's in the chat, but my question was talking about the percentage decrease in effort. And I'm just wondering what that means sort of in real terms, in terms of, for example, how many staff were in the team that had that percentage decrease in effort and what they were doing before, rather than just a percentage, like a value, a number.
Sure. Would you like me to answer that, or?
Yeah, go ahead, Eli.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So the way we quantify that is, so there's two things. When we extract the information, there could be missing fields. They might just be blank, not because they weren't written. So there's that. But what will happen is we extract the information with whatever we have on hand, as long as the case passes the business validation rules, we're going to put into the CRM, and the CRMs that Accerta has allow for us to create a case, put whatever we have, get an ID back and save it, and then give that ID to a person in SharePoint. So when they go and they get the case and they look at a case in SharePoint, has the form that was originally extracted. So they, if there was additional things there that maybe the bot didn't capture, they're available to them. And then they'll have that ID, they'll go into the CRM and they'll look up the case. There it is with everything we filled out, most of the information, and then they just finish it. So that's what it means to,
Sure.
so we're capturing partial work is through that mechanism.
Yeah, so I understand how you're measuring it. Oh, no, that's how you're measuring it. My question is more about what's the absolute, is it 10 people's work? Is it 100 people's work that you're saving 53?
Oh, the FTE count for this?
Yeah, or some sort of indication of what sort of scale of sort of human impact there is on.
Well, I can take that question.
Okay.
With this project alone, I would say it was roughly we're anywhere between 7 to 10% reduction in terms of human effort. So if we had 100 people in the call center area, you'd be looking at saving anywhere from 7 to 10 headcount.
Okay, and so how many people are approximately we're talking about in your case? We're talking about 100,000 forms. How does that translate into headcount?
Yeah, well, it's not just forms; it's also call center too, right?
Oh, right.
So they do both. They basically answer calls, and when they're not answering calls, they'll be working on the forms, on the form processing. So the culmination of the both, we have about 60 to 70 individuals.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. We have maybe 5 minutes left. Probably time for another quick question or two, if anybody has any.
There was one question around the careers in the chat that I think we missed, which was what new career paths were introduced.
Sure.
Peter, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that. We basically had, I'd say, 3 to 4 net new positions as a result of this project. One was more learning about the project and the technology, so the Blue Prism bots and Hyperscience, and then looking at that individual's objective was to make small changes or tweaks to the processes, not major customizations. So that was one new position. Another one was on the support side, and we have a third one which is on the QA side. So they're QAing any changes that are being made, and then we're introducing a fourth position that is going to be a backup to the first position, which is the changes that we're looking at making. So as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at other processes within the organization, east to west, and we're identifying the low-hanging fruit. And over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to be implementing new projects that are going to streamline those processes.
Thank you. And there's a follow-up from Kieran. support to introduce the change and support the change, or support for the processing?
It's a bit of both. It's, you know, supporting the changes. So there's a help desk for the users. As I mentioned earlier, you know, one of our challenges was change. And naturally, people had a lot of questions. And then there's support for the processing as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so we only have 4 minutes left. Just wanted to thank our presenters today again. Jamie, Eli, Peter, thanks very much for this. Was really a great presentation. A lot of good questions. We definitely will share the slide deck. The recording will also be available. Thanks for joining today. Jesse, did you want to add anything at the end of the presentation before we close it off?
No, excellent presentation. Thanks everyone so much for attending. Yeah, appreciate you helping me out, Nat. Yeah, anyway, look forward to the next one. Definitely sign up. The registration's already being accepted, and if you're interested in speaking in the summer or fall sessions, please do reach out.
Thank you, Jamie, Eli, Peter, again. Pleasure to meet you, and great presentation.
Thanks, Nat. Thanks, Jesse.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.